Lindani, thank you so much for joining us in the studio today. I'm thrilled to have somebody from the V&A Waterfront with us in the studio, and I'm excited to explore this conversation around the ocean economy, entrepreneur-led innovation, perhaps your story. And so I'm ready to dive into the conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you, Nawisa, for having me. It's a conversation that's dear to my heart and one that has changed my life in more ways than one.
Oh, good. I can't wait to see where we go with this then.
Yeah.
Lindani, perhaps before we even start, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what do you do, and what kind of gets you out of bed every day?
So my name is Lindani Mchunu. I guess everybody has to start with their name when they introduce themselves, but is it who they are? I'm not too sure. I am the marine manager at the V&A Waterfront. I actually started this year. And what the job entails really is I look after all the ship movement in and out of the harbour precinct of the V&A. And we have tenants as well who do charters there. We have fishing industry there. And we have casuals, people who are just coming in privately into the V&A from different parts of the world. So you'd say the water part of the waterfront is where I'm involved quite a lot.
Sure.
So, yeah.
And maybe for purposes of our listeners who maybe aren't from Cape Town or from South Africa or have never had the pleasure of being able to go to the V&A Waterfront, can you tell us a little bit more about the V&A Waterfront as a place?
Yeah.
And in particular in terms of how its sense of place is very much centered on and around the ocean.
Yeah. So, if you come to Cape Town, it's funny because we had a talk, like a strategy thing, at the V&A. And the speaker was saying that we're the center of the center of the center. Mm-hmm. That's how he described the V&A. And I guess that's how I see it, because it's a development that's really kind of found its way around water, because initially that was a harbor. Initially that was where, ships from different parts of the world would come and victual there and interact with the Khoisan. And probably it's where the first landings happened, on the continent from Europe, So, and it still has that characterization, because when you're at the V&A, it's like an ecosystem in a way. And it's an international city or a village in a way. So it's like almost walking at the airport. When you're there, you see so many different people. I can't think of a place in South Africa that is like that. You've got your residential area, so there's people who live there every day. I
used to live there.
You used to live there. Oh, interesting. You've got hotels, so people who come and go. You've got the boating community, who operate, during the day, and you see lots of activity. You've got your industrial aspect, which is like the fishing industry, Oceana Group, Viking, all these people. You've got education, you've got I think the UCT graduate school there.
Correct.
You've got corporates like Nedbank, the banks, and your Deloitte, and you've got the V&A kind of like coordinating, so we're like the facilitator of this little small village.
Absolutely.
And that's really what we are. And we're self-sustaining, because I'm in the water aspect, in that department, which is marine and industrial. There's people who are in the retail, there's marketing people, so there's landscaping, there's civils, there's people who are in the electrical, lots of maintenance going around. And I think that's been my appreciation, I think, being at the V&A, seeing how much it takes to retain beauty, functionality, and make sure that there's longevity. And it's funny because there's a lot of construction that happens at the V&A, whilst people are moving around. Lots of change that takes place. But at the same time, it looks like it stays the same, I was explaining, I don't know who I was talking to, and I was saying to them, it's so weird that change and consistency are intertwined. The other one can't happen without the other. And I think that's what you see in the V&A. It's an ever-changing landscape, but somehow still remains the same.
Absolutely. And I think for me, what is interesting about the V&A, as you describe it, and also how I've lived through it and moved through it, is that ecosystem that you describe and this global village that you describe is exactly what entrepreneurs need and are looking for. And so the V&A becomes a very interesting example of a place, an ecosystem, and a community in terms of enabling entrepreneurs, because it's about entrepreneurs having access to
the market,
in terms of customers
and facilities,
access to facilities, and so enabling spaces and enabling environment,
Yeah.
access to network,
Yes.
whether it is people from the business school or other professionals, other entrepreneurs, and access to finance,
Of
because
course.
this is a huge commercial district, right, in terms
is.
of trade and
That's correct.
retail that's happening in that one place.
It's like almost like a special economic zone.
It
Those
absolutely
zones that
is,
they
yes,
have.
it absolutely
yeah, it's
is.
almost like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is like that. 'Cause
Yeah.
you're so, as you say, you're kind of exposed to everything. I mean, if you look at what they've done at Maker's Landing, by the cruise terminal, was this new thing of kind of like a farm to plate.
Absolutely.
So creating that for small businesses, to be able to get, kind of ability to have an industrial kitchen, something that they
Absolutely.
wouldn't
Shared
have.
services,
Shared
and
services.
talking about the shared economy,
Exactly,
yeah.
the shared economy. And then with the cruise ships that come and land there, now you've got direct market to tourists where you can
Totally.
sell product,
Totally.
So it's amazing that they've been able to create that in that space. And it's almost like it should be a template, I say, for the rest of the country.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so I think this beautiful, dynamic that you describe around consistency around change, but at the same time,
Kind of staying the
things
same.
staying the same.
Yeah.
Immediately, it obviously took me right back to why we're having this conversation,
Yeah.
because that sounds then very much like the ocean.
Ocean. It is,
right?
isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Which is this thing where when you look at it, it feels like it hasn't changed at all, but
Yeah.
actually there's
But
so much
actually
going
there's so
on
much
there.
going on, yeah.
And so what is your relationship with the ocean?
Yeah, I've been asked this question a few times, and normally the question is, how did I get into the ocean? How was I introduced to the ocean? And I think it's two parts. So I won't give one answer, I'll give two.
That's okay. We like more is more here.
So and it's so strange, because when I was driving here, I was telling my mother that I'm about to talk about my relationship with the ocean again, and something quite personal is taking place in my life right now, because the person who introduced me to the ocean for the first time was my grandmother, and she's 94, 95 now.
It's a magical number.
And she's very ill.
Okay.
And I think she's kind of like on her deathbed in a way. So it's an emotional thing for me, because she introduced me when I was very young. And how that happened was my grandmother was what you would say, what do they call it? Kind of like a seer. Someone who is an oracle of sorts in the African sense. And so one of her ways of healing people was to use water. Everything was very much water-based. And her belief system was through prayer and connection to the source and spirituality. You could imbue your intentions of healing through the medium of water. So she'd pray for water, and in Zulu we'd call it iswasho, which literally means to cleanse. And she would pray for the water and give it to the person, whatever ailment that they had. And the belief or the pact between the two of them was that through this water and her intention, there would be healing. And so, because I was very young, my mother had me very young, I happened to be like this kid, this toddler who was around her. My grandmother was at home all the time, praying for people. She had like a queue of people outside. And so everything she did was through water. I would have to go with her to the river to go and get the water, because she would go to specific rivers to get the water. And then we would go to the ocean. And that's when really, and the way she introduced it to me, I think, is how a lot of African people view the ocean. It was so much reverence. It's almost like she was introducing God, But what I later learned was it also is a hindrance and a challenge and a barrier for African people to have more kind of contact with the ocean, like getting into sports like extreme sports like sailing and all of that, because we have this, and maybe it's not just African people, it's like indigenous people across the board. They have this reverence with the ocean that God resides there, and maybe true to form. So that's how she introduced me to it. We would go to the ocean, we'd take people there, really stand on the shoreline with our feet in, and she'd almost like baptize people there, either in the ocean or in the rivers, you know. So that was my first introduction. And then I would grow up and I wouldn't have like, you know, any contact with water for many years after that. I liked to swim, you know, and stuff at school. But, you know, no ways. There was like no contact at all. I didn't do any water sports and all of that. And then the second introduction to water happens on a train, on the Gau train. From Midrand. I'm coming from the I think it's called Grand Central Airport in Midrand. And I'd been renewing my private pilot's license at the time. And so I get on this train. I'm going, because I was living in Ilovo, so from Midrand to Rosebank with the Gau train. And I'm on the train, and I just happened to be sitting opposite like this middle-aged white gentleman from Cape Town. And I had this aviation book in my hand. And we started to talk about, you know, airplanes and aviation and blah, 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 and all of that. And towards the end of our conversation, he then mentions that he has a friend in Cape Town, and his son is a pilot, and he's also a sailor, he's a delivery skipper, and he takes boats from Cape Town to different parts of the world.
Amazing.
And me, with my curious mind, I'm like, oh, what is that? What is
That
sailing?
sounds cool.
That sounds cool. That sounds really cool. And he's like, no, take my card when you get home, you know, drop me a line and I'll send you a link to a sailing school in Cape Town. And sure enough, I do that. He drops me a line. I check out the sailing school in Cape Town. And the next thing I know, 2 weeks after that, I'm flying to Cape Town. I come here to a sailing school in Royal Cape Yacht Club. And I do, you know, then the guy tells me, do you know anything about sailing? I'm like, no. He's like, okay, we're going to go to Langaban, Mykonos. We're going to spend a week. You're going to do a competent crew course, and then you'll tell me how you feel. So we go there, and I get on the boat, and, you know, we come out with an engine with a sailboat, and they take up the sails and everything, and they switch off the engine, and this thing is moving like, you know, with wind, you know. And I'm just fascinated. And then he gives me the wheel, this guy, and I hold this thing, and, you know, it was just like, wow. It just blew my mind that, you know, like, we're on the water, we're on the small boat, we're moving with wind, we're on the ocean. This is incredible. And that was like when the connection happened for finality.
Right.
Yeah. And I was like, what, in my late 20s.
Right.
Yeah.
That is a beautiful conversation. And so, or at least a beautiful conversion in terms of, you know, taking it from the time your reverence to the ocean, you know, instilled by your grandmother, to perhaps then being in the air and looking at the ocean from on high, to then being on the
crazy
ocean.
Because
you know?
actually, when I was flying in Port Alfred, which is the Eastern Cape. And we used to fly low-level flying over the ocean there, you know, and I used to look at it, but just from like that perspective, you know, so it was quite strange. And when I talk about it, like when I say I've lived most of my life in Johannesburg, everybody's like, how do you get to water, to the ocean when you're in that concrete jungle, you know? But it was just a chance meeting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was a chance meeting.
And so, you know, with this context in terms of your experience, having also established the context around the V&A Waterfront, what is your understanding then of the ocean economy specifically?
Yeah. So it's you know, it's broad. If you think of the ocean economy, you know, you'd start pretty much from where I started, which is ocean sports, you know, because that's really mostly my background, and even how I get to the V&A. I'm a sailor. I sail, and I've sailed, you know, different parts of the world, and lived in Cape Verde islands, where I was doing charters and sailing there. And there you see another aspect in Cape Verde of the ocean economy, which is, you know, small fishermen, you know, so kind of small scale fishermen who go out and they catch fish and all of that and come back and sell to the market and make a living. We have a little bit of that here. And then you see the kind of bigger guys like your INJs and Sea Harvest who do global fishing, you know. And then you see cruise liners, which is what we have here, which is now you're getting to the tourism side of ocean, kind of leisure. And then you've got also here in South Africa, which is something that people don't know about. You've got boat manufacturing of leisure boats, you know, catamarans. We're big. We're actually number 2 in the world. People don't know this.
It's incredible. I believe we're number 2 after France.
Yes.
So we're a very good company.
Yes. And it's incredible. I mean, it's like, it's insane how many boats we churn out. And how well we've done. So, and then you've got sustainability, right? You know, you've got people who are trying to save coral reefs. You've got people who are trying to get into sustainable fishing. You've got, you know, so it's so broad, but I always feel that the most critical part in bringing everything together, why everything doesn't speak to everything else, is this part of inclusion. You know, it gets me because I always feel like I never cared for the ocean as much as I do now when I lived in Johannesburg, for instance. I mean, the ocean was so far removed from me. And I didn't care about ocean conservation and what's happening in the ocean and, you know, sea life, you know, is it dying? What's happening with coral reefs, you know, and all the things that we know of, and climate change and how the ocean has impacted turtles, you know, the endangerment of what's happening with whales and so forth. All these things meant nothing to me, you know. But it's only when I started sailing, you know, and actually seeing dolphins out in the ocean and seeing how free they are. Now I can't go to aquariums, and I just can't. Like anything that says SeaWorld, I'm like, please, you know, I can't stand to see a dolphin in a tank or a shark in a tank, because I know what it looks like for that animal to be free. And that's where I'm going with this, that there's something that needs to be done about, you know, kind of bringing people from the coastlines, from rural communities, whether it be in the Eastern Cape or the KZN, who hardly have any interaction with the ocean, who don't understand that the plastics they use on land and all the pollution kind of ends up in the ocean, who don't understand that the oxygen we breathe, most of it comes from there. So the conversation becomes very academic. And then you ask yourself, why is it so difficult for us to convince the world that climate change is real? And then I think to myself, maybe it's difficult because the people who are talking about climate change and ocean conservations, it's like, you know, you're speaking to the converted. All of you understand this. If you're all scientists in some forum in Switzerland and you're checking out data and what's happening with climate change, no one is going to disagree. You know, you're well versed. You've done the research. You know, you're educated people. You're scientists. But the moment you go out there and you say these things, and people have absolutely kind of no relationship whatsoever with what you're even talking about, you know, how do they even start to comprehend these things that you're saying? To them, they see the ocean, they see this vast body of water that takes up 70% of our planet. How on earth could we affect that?
Absolutely.
You get how on earth could we impact that? Even if we threw 1 million plastics to that, surely they just sink somewhere. Yeah, they just sink somewhere and disappear. You know, how could we deplete the fish? I mean, look at this thing; it's so huge. You know, so and that's ignorance, right? But more than ignorance, it's just lack of participation. You know, our communities, whether it be here in South Africa or around the coastline of Africa, they just have no interaction, no tangible interaction with this thing that's called the ocean. So you can't then expect them, the very people that we say are polluting it, to have a vested interest in saving it if they don't even understand actually how they could participate economically as well. from that? When we speak about the ocean economy,
Absolutely.
how much participation do rural people in the Eastern Cape have in terms of South African boat building? You get what I'm saying?
Totally. And I think it does then speak to very much, something that I repeat quite a lot in many conversations in terms of then the mantra from the Branson Center side, which is, we exist, one, to change business for good. That's our purpose. But our mantra is, how can we work with entrepreneurs and partner with them in a way that to ensure that we are building an inclusive economy that enables thriving people and sustains a healthy planet.
Yeah.
And so for us, being part of this conversation around, can we, or maybe asking the question, is it possible to have entrepreneur-led innovation that enables an inclusive ocean economy?
Sure.
That's the question that we're in, and the conversation that we're
you're
in
asking.
amongst ourselves, and bringing people like you into this conversation. And so perhaps the question now is, what opportunities do you see for South African entrepreneurs to play a role in building an inclusive ocean economy?
Good question, actually. Maybe let me speak about my role, and the job that I do. So I sit on a few kind of boards within this ocean space, right? So I occupy the board of the National Sea Rescue Institute. What do? They are basically the last line of defense for people who drown, whether it be in dams or rivers, wherever they have stations. And if we have sailors or people that are in serious situations, whether it be fishermen on the coastline of South Africa, this is like the Coast Guard. These are the people that go out and save people's lives, okay? Now, it's a huge organization. It's big, I think the head office is here in Milnerton. They're currently building vessels like 20 million rand a pop, built, I think, by Two Oceans in Pardon Island. In everything that they're doing, I haven't seen any interaction from, let's say, Khayelitsha or Manenberg or Gooks or Langa. I don't even know whether those people at, what's the beach called in Khayelitsha? Monwabisa Beach. I don't even know if those people are aware of such a thing. And how do they come to the party to even volunteer, for instance? Lifeguards. Does Monwabisi Beach have lifeguards that are African, that are from local, who can work there and make an income? I doubt it. So what's the conversation that's not being had there? So that's just one. And then I sit on the board of South African Builders, Boat Builders Export Council. And we've got maybe close to 40, 50, local boat builders in the country. Majority of them are in the Western Cape. They're in Knysna, St. Francis Bay, all the way down here to Pardon Island. Okay, we've got Robertson and Kane, who are kind of like my client as well at the V&A, because their finished product or semi-finished product ends up at the V&A. And that's where they do the touch-ups and stuff. So that's where the vessels leave from the V&A, basically, and then go overseas and get on, the big ships and stuff, containers and all of that. In that whole chain, again, I've never seen where's the inclusivity in terms of the greater Cape Flats. Yes, there's jobs. If you look at Southern Wind, for instance, they make some amazing, incredible sailing yachts. I think anything from 100 million rand upwards just for a single boat. So it's really luxury stuff. They're in Athlone. So that colored community in Athlone has been building these award-winning world-class vessels that go to Europe and win awards in America and so forth here in Athlone.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, correct? But you ask yourself in terms of the supply chain. Yeah, so I mean, you've got this, Southern Wind is one of the biggest boat building companies in the world in their space, in their game. But I don't see, as much as there are artisans and they're people of color and they're creating these great boats, I don't see out of that kind of small businesses being born. And I think that's where we're lacking.
That's where the opportunity
That's where the
lies.
opportunity, like
Yeah.
where that's because if we're building boats at the rate that we are in South Africa, and we're as big as we are, then those boats, everything from a nail to a piece of rope to a window to an aircon to whatever,
To the design,
to the
to-
design should be localized. Everything. You know what I mean? And we should be getting supplies from here, from home, from different parts of our country. You know what I mean? But a lot of what goes on to these boats is still being, kind of imported from overseas. So
It's such an incredible opportunity.
so localization,
Yeah.
that's the opposite. That's the opportunity. But you can't have localization without first having integration.
Absolutely. So
Integration of communities
Yeah.
that are actually left outside
of the conversation.
of the conversation and of those kind of bubble economies, right? Because boat building is a bubble economy. Nobody knows about it. Every time I talk about it, people are like, "Oh,
This is
I
a
didn't know
thing."
that. I didn't know that. You know what I mean? Every time I say I'm in Johannesburg, and I tend to regard people from Johannesburg as very exposed, kind of, well traveled, educated. I always call it like our black Mecca. Where you see black people actually kind of taking that next step
Right.
and going into different areas. Not everybody's a doctor, a lawyer, and people are starting their own businesses, doing careers. They're kind of reinventing what it means to be black in the first place. So I always see Joburg like that. But I go to Joburg a lot. And every single space that I occupy, the moment I say I'm a sailor, I'm in boat building industry, and I sail boats, and everybody's like, what is that? What is that? You get what I'm saying? So imagine now I say that in Ekumbu, or I say that in Butterworth, or I say that in Limpopo somewhere, or I say that Ulundi, or Mlazi, Kwamashu, or Mdantsane, Elanga, then it's even lost on
Yeah.
people. You get what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say? No one could even understand me. And I think that aspect of integrating people who are left outside, into this economy is probably where the first work has to start. Like,
That's a really important point, because I think we get excited and we kind of get ahead of ourselves and we dive straight into a conversation about ocean economy. Immediately we're into conversation about innovation.
Yeah.
But I think you're kind of bringing us all the way down and anchoring us in
Yes,
the
yes.
conversation around there is no innovation without integration. There is no integration without inclusion. And so what is that first step? And I think then that is also the importance of even having these conversations and having this series of very interesting storytellers who are talking to us as the Branson Center about your personal relationship with the ocean, but also your role in terms of what you do,
Yeah.
and of course what you see.
Yeah.
And so as we start wrapping up, I'm curious to find out, seeing that you've kind of had this regard of the ocean and the ocean economy from your position as a sailor,
Yeah.
but of course as the marine manager at the V&A Waterfront.
Yeah.
What change have you seen happen, small or big or incremental, but is there any change that you've seen taking place either on, around, under the ocean, within the ocean economy? Is there anything that you've observed?
What I like and what I have observed is the conversation is getting wider and wider. I like that. The conversation is getting wider and wider. More communities are being involved. More people are taking it up. For instance, I used to run an academy here in Cape Town at the Royal Cape Yacht Club. And my whole aim was to walk the talk and say, if I'm talking about integration and inclusion, then I need to kind of have a vehicle where. So the whole thing was an outreach program, and we'd be bringing kids from various Cape flats and brought them into this program, teach them about how to sail, teach them about boat building, and then kind of open up the various pathways, okay? So what I'm seeing is maybe 10 years ago, it was just like a few people talking about it, you know? Oh, ocean economy this, ocean economy that. And when people were talking about ocean economy, they were talking shipping, you know? They were talking oil and gas, okay? They were talking fishing, okay? But today you have the economy, you have the conversation. It's much more complex. It's much more diverse. People now talk about aqua farming. People now talk about sailing. People talk about sustainability. You know, the conversation is just getting wider in terms of its reach, but also becoming more diverse as well in terms of how many things is the ocean economy actually about. It's not just about fishing. You know what I mean? It's not just, it's not just about cruise liners. It's not just about oil and gas and shipping, you know, and what you see happening at the TNPA harbour. No, it's much bigger than that. You know what I mean? There's wind technologies now. You know, like for instance, I'll make an example. A lot of people don't know, but I'm sure a lot of people drive past. If you look at in Bloberg, during the December time, you've got all those kite surfers there, right? Yeah. And they come from like different parts of the world. So people don't know that South Africa is like a mecca of kite surfing there in Bloberg. But it just doesn't end there. Do we have national champions of kite surfing that come from Mitchell's Plain? Do we? I don't know. I don't think so.
We'll find them.
and do we have artisans in Manenberg or Langa who are actually making boards in their backyard for these amazing, you know, kind of equipment that they use for kite surfing? Are they thinking? Do we have, you know, these mamas and ladies who are actually sewing and making the kites themselves? You know what I mean? That material, you know.
And of course, sewing doesn't necessarily have to be limited.
Of course, to females,
to women.
Yes,
so
of course.
Anyone who's interested in that,
yes, exactly. But that's what I'm saying. That it's about diversifying the conversation. You know, and when you speak of innovation, for me, that's what innovation is. It's about how much diversity do you have in the room. And that's what makes the V&A so successful, because the V&A has so much diversity in that precinct that we're all feeding off each other's kind of strengths, right?
Exactly.
And it makes for this amazing community and this amazing village. And I think that's where the ocean economy needs to go. It needs to make sure that it's got enough diversity in the room for innovation to take place.
Amazing. Challenge accepted. Thank you so much, Lindani, for being part of this conversation, adding to the diversity of the conversation, challenging our thinking. And so we look forward to staying in conversation with you. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Novisa.
You must slap it.
Oh, should I start?
Yes.
Okay.
Yay! So exciting. And we get to, guys, also this huskiness that's in me doesn't sound too bad, hey?
No, you sound great.
I keep her around for the
For
affirmation.
that, eh? Yeah, we all need that.
So good.
Yeah, we need that.
It's so good.
We need